Hi everyone, and welcome to another Black Marble BiteSize. This is the second in a series of interviews with our Microsoft Most Valuable Professionals. I'm Elizabeth, Business Development Manager at Black Marble, and with me is our Chief Consulting Officer and Microsoft Regional Director, Rik Hepworth. We're going to have a chat today about being an MVP and all things Azure. Don't worry, Rik, I'm not going to channel my inner Piers Morgan. I'll be nice to you, as long as you answer the question. But to get us started, Rik, could you just give us a brief introduction about yourself, your specialist technology areas, and why you have been recognised as a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional?
3 things you must know about the mad old consultant. So I've been working for Black Marble since about 2006 full time, but the people that founded the business and I go back quite a long time. Anybody with grey hair at Black Marble, we basically sort of met each other through university. I've worked in various organizations with large and small systems and solutions, managing networks, managing desktops, all of that kind of stuff. I joined Black Marble as we started to do sort of bigger, more complicated projects that had a mix of that sort of network management, resource management, that kind of thing. And now I've reached the point where IT pros think I'm a dev because I work for a dev shop. Devs know I'm not a dev because I don't code, and I'm sort of in this limbo that nobody wants to accept me on their team anymore. I'm the guy that nobody wants to pick, you know. One of the things that we always held dear at Black Marble, right, is that we want to make everybody in the technology industry better at what they do. We're passionate, we're enthusiastic, we're always learning, and we wanted to be able to help people on the same journey. And as a result of that, we organize events like DDD North and DDD Reading. We speak at conferences, we support user groups. And that community activity is what the MVP program is an award to recognize. It isn't that I'm a Microsoft shill or anything like that. Yes, I talk about Microsoft technologies, but I give a frank and honest opinion of those technologies. And the beauty of being an MVP is that I get a great relationship with the teams at Microsoft to learn about those technologies, to be able to take that information, to push it out to the community and the technical audiences that I'm working with, and again, bolster their knowledge. And I don't do this to be an MVP. The MVP is an award. I do it because I love it. I'd still love it if I wasn't an MVP, but the MVP is the icing on the cake, right? And the regional directors are a little bit similar. It's still community focused, but it's more sort of CXO level engagement, if you like. So other RDs around the world are entrepreneurs, CXOs, company founders, that kind of thing. And we engage with Microsoft about a range of topics where, again, we're trying to channel what our networks are telling us, what our communities are telling us, to be, if you like, the voice of the audience chipping into Microsoft's ear and being able to reflect back and support initiatives like the great work that Microsoft are doing with STEM and the work that they're doing with women in technology, all things that we passionately believe in here that we want to go out and support. And yeah, you know, there's also benefits to Black Marble as an organization, there's benefits to Black Marble as a customer, but that's not quite why I do it, if you like. Frankly, I do it because I love it.
That's a good answer. So there's more to being an MVP than just a few extra initials on your signature and that award that I can see behind you on your bookcase. So there's a whole community of people that you're working with, sharing ideas. But for you personally, what is your favourite aspect of being an MVP?
Yeah, so the thing that I haven't done for a while, so every MVP's favorite aspect of being an MVP is actually MVP Summit. And what that means is normally we actually get to spend a week with Microsoft at Microsoft on campus, talking to all the different product teams, hearing about what's going on, and importantly, seeing and meeting all the other MVPs. The greatest part of community in general and an MVP specifically are the other people in that community. And I've made some wonderful friends while being an MVP, and it's given me the opportunity to speak at events and support events and support my friends around the world in what they're trying to do. And I do get a real kick out of that.
It's good you've been given the opportunity to meet so many people who are interested in the same things. And speaking of community work, you do speak regularly at conferences and events all over the world, recently at ESPC and Microsoft Ignite. You've also done a few webinars for Black Marble, and your next one is called Friends Don't Let Friends Do IaaS Except When They Do. Could you give us a brief overview of what that actually means?
Yeah, so the most important learning I have taken recently is don't use flippant phrases when having conversations with the business development director, because she'll write them down and make you craft a webinar around them.
Absolutely.
So thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so I mean, joking aside, I think the Black Marble webinar series is something that we've really sort of tried to do since lockdown, right? Because we're not necessarily able to get out to people like we used to do. And we want to talk a bit about what we're doing, and we want to try and give people good advice. And my specialist subject, if you want to call it that, in Azure really is around sort of governance and operations and good practice. And it does sound flippant. Friends don't let friends do IaaS. It's a bit like friends don't let friends right click publish, right? Back away from that F5 key. It's all about good practice and sustainable practices. And the thing about IaaS, so for those who don't know, IaaS is infrastructure as a service. And that's, if you like, what most cloud, interestingly not Azure, started off being. It's the, I no longer want to run physical servers in my machine room. I don't know why, because IT pros like to open the door and just look at the flickering lights. But anyway, I don't want to do that because every 3 years I've got this big capex bill. I want to get rid of that huge source of heat, that kind of stuff. I want to push it away. And originally we had hosting, where we put our servers in other people's racks. And all cloud does is abstract that again. So now I'm paying Microsoft for a virtual machine instead of me buying a server. Now, there are valid uses for IaaS in cloud. If we're closing down our data center, we've got a load of virtual machines. We want to put them somewhere because we still need virtual machines, because we still have servers. We run Active Directory. We might run Exchange if we're not using Office 365. We might have line of business systems. That's a valid use of IaaS. We're not doing infrastructure management and migration. We're talking about migrating your line of business applications and importantly, building new ones. And if you're building an application in the cloud, your primary drivers for doing that should be business value, agility, flexibility, and cost effectiveness. Nobody can really say that IaaS is cost effective, right? Because I'm paying for a virtual machine with several CPUs and cores and all that kind of stuff, and it's running all the time, right? And just like when you were a teenager and your dad used to say, will you turn that PC off when you're not using it because it's costing me money? Same thing, right? The electricity meter's ticking, and it's costing me money even if it's not being used. And if I suddenly get a load of peak load, we've launched the new Black Marble Dewgenta 300 sunglasses, and 1 million people want to sign up, order these things, but the box isn't big enough. Our website crashes. It can't scale. It can't make itself bigger quickly. That's what platform as a service is for. It's about using the right tools for your application. It's about looking at what the capabilities you need and crafting the solution appropriately. Well, the thing is, whilst I always sit there and go, friends don't let friends do IaaS when we're architecting this, sometimes you've just got this little annoying block in your app architecture that you just can't do with PaaS services. And it might be that I've got to keep a connection to something on premises because I've got some data that's crown jewels and I absolutely can't put it outside our premises. Or I've got a component that's actually, it's legacy. We joke a lot because there was a thing the other week about writing functions in COBOL. COBOL, a programming language from before you were born, Elizabeth. But we joke about that. But sometimes there are things that are a core part of our application, but we just can't move them. They're old. We need to run them in a certain way. And at that point, an IaaS bridgehead, if you like, this little intractable bit, that might be a reasonable solution. And as with all things cloud, it's a matter of trying to work out what's part of a healthy, balanced diet, right? It's all about a set of architectural principles, not a set of hard and fast rules. So we'd like to go serverless over platform as a service, over infrastructure as a service, where serverless is brilliant, because if the thing's not running, it's not costing me any money at all. It's basically pay to play, right? Azure Functions, Logic Apps, that kind of stuff. If something executes, I get charged a fraction of a pence or a cent or whatever. Brilliant. There's a direct correlation then between what my app does and my business process that's calling the app. And I can say, hey, look, your cost of sale involves threepence for this process. PaaS, I'm probably still paying while it's running, and it's probably running all month, but it's elastic. It can scale up, it can scale out, it can do things that IaaS can't. And then IaaS is the dinosaur in the room, but occasionally you still need to use the dinosaur, right? I mean, I'm living proof of that. I'm great, I'm knocking on a bit, but hopefully I still add value. That is what the webinar is going to be out in a nutshell. How do you identify those scenarios? How do you talk your developers back from the ledge of sticking to IaaS? How do you bring the IT pros into the conversation and get them to engage with the new world of PaaS? Not that it's really a new world anymore. And how do you sort of present that all to the business?
So how would you recommend an easy way of deciding which of the three, IaaS, PaaS and SaaS, is best for the company?
There's a $64,000 question. There isn't an easy way of deciding, is the straight answer to that. So what you need, this actually comes to governance, which is my favorite subject. If you're going to use any kind of technology, right, you have to think about the context of within which you're using it. You've got to think about what kind of guardrails you're going to put up to ensure that people suddenly don't veer off the reservation and start using things you don't want them to, putting them in places you don't want them to. And all of this comes down to a set of simple questions, really, is what are we trying to build? What is it going to do? What is its purpose within our organization? So if we are looking at a sales website for a retailer, right? We want that to be as cost effective as possible. So we want it to be as cheap as possible when our customers aren't using it, but it has to be able to suddenly explode and cope with, Prime Day load or Black Friday sales load and that kind of stuff. It's got to be reliable. It's got to be easy to see what's going on. It's got to be relatively straightforward to update different components, because businesses like retail have to be fleet of foot, right? They've got to pivot to be able to offer new services, new offerings to customers. They've got to be able to plug in new suppliers. They've got to work with stock control systems, their warehousing systems, all kinds of stuff. Not so much platform as a service versus serverless versus IaaS. What you actually need to do is to say, okay, we've got a set of guiding architectural principles as to how we're going to build our applications based on the context of those apps. So our principles would be things like, in terms of technology choice, we look at what the team knows and understands, and we're going to try and stick to things that we have experience in, and only pick new technologies into like .NET versus Java versus Go versus, I don't know, Erlang, Haskell, whatever. Pick your language du jour. Devs love to learn new stuff, and that's great, but it's not always appropriate, right? Because if we're building our mission critical website, I'd rather they stuck to the language that they've known for 20 years, man and boy, and they know the insides outsides of, than we suddenly cut our teeth on something new, because there's business risk associated with that. So there's the technology choice, and that applies to the services in the cloud as well. And then there's our, if you like, platform choice, which says, well, what cloud services are we going to use? And again, we filter that through knowledge and experience. So we're not going to suddenly try and build this on a cloud service that isn't released yet. It might still be in preview. For our flagship sales website, that would be a lot of risk, because what happens if it never comes out of preview? What happens if it changes before we go prod? Are we suddenly having an engineering overhead of having to keep up with the service itself as it develops and as it gets modified and changed as Microsoft are building it? And what components are we trying to connect into this thing? Do we need to think about security? How are we going to deal with identity? Pick those parts of your application structure, and normally there's a choice of 2 or 3 in any given area, right? And that's where the architectural principles and the governance comes in, because there might be some that you can't use because they're not available in your region, or you shouldn't use because it's in preview, or you ought to use because it's higher up the list of preference. because it's newer technology. It opens up better flexibility in architectural models. It fits with your microservice strategy, if that's what you're going to do, or bluntly, it isn't IaaS. That's a very long-winded way of saying basically it depends, right? And that's my job. My job is to come in and work with you, the customer, whiteboard what you're doing, ask those questions, and through the answers you give me, help you navigate that sort of moral maze of, what are we going to build, how are we going to build it, and what color are we going to paint it, and can we have it on Thursday?
Yeah, so you said governance is your favorite topic to discuss, and you recently delivered a webinar about it. Why is it so passionate to you? What is so important about governance?
There's two kinds of work we do at Black Marble, right? There's a customer comes to us and says, I've got a burning need for an application. I need to be able to count the goats on the steps of the Himalayas from orbit. Can you help? And we'll go, absolutely. That sounds interesting.
Really?
Yeah, too right. Let's not get started on that one, because I can architect that one for you if you like. There's an entire conference session in that one. But the other thing that we get a lot of is organizations that have started down the cloud journey and they've stumbled. And almost always the reason they've stumbled is because they didn't have that guidance, that internal good practice, those guardrails to govern how the project was run. And it might be they've built the most beautiful solution, it's fantastically architected, but their budget's been blown out of the water because they didn't have any cost constraints. Or it's a fantastic solution, but they can only deploy it in UK South, and one of the core services they've used is in, I don't know, Central America only. All of those are because of a lack of governance. Nobody said at the start, hey, development team, look, yes, you got free reign, but not really quite, kind of, because we need you to consider these things. We don't want you to use services in preview. We don't want you to look at services that are not available in our region. And it's because businesses don't look at the cloud as the all-encompassing, touches every part of the organization that they should do. They think it's still IT in that little cupboard downstairs, right, running on a server. And that was easy to manage and govern because we owned it. We could go and touch it and point at it. We knew exactly where our data was because I could go and stick my finger on the hard disk while it's spinning. Cloud's a lot more complicated than that. And what I try and do is help organizations work out what the essential governance is for them to dip their toe initially into cloud, and how they manage and maintain that governance moving forward. How do they work out if the governance they've got isn't working for them? How do they review it? How do they look at new areas to govern? And it should cover things like technology. What are we going to use? What can we use? What can't we use? Under what circumstances will we evaluate new technology? All of those kind of things. Security. How do we work out who's got access to what? How do we control access to what? How do we audit it? How do we monitor it? How do we prove that we're doing what we're supposed to do in line with, I don't know, ISO 27001 or whatever external regulatory body we've got as a company? And data governance, where are we storing our data? Do we know what our data is? Are we encrypting it? Are we handling it correctly? Can we prove and articulate to people who ask us who touched that data and what we're using it and where it's going? And the webinars, the conference sessions, the consulting I do, the white paper that Robert and I put forward, all of that is about organizations moving responsibly into the cloud with their eyes open, knowing what homework they've got to do in advance, knowing effectively where the sharks are going to come at them from and what they need to do in terms of putting those sort of early warning systems in, guardrail systems in, what they need to do about security, and how they report on that to reflect out to their stakeholders, the customers, the suppliers, the regulatory bodies, how they can prove to those stakeholders that they are using the cloud responsibly, that they are managing data responsibly, all of that kind of stuff. And it's a really key area, and I'm passionate about it. That's
good. Other than governance, what other advice would you give to companies that are just starting out in their cloud journey?
Ooh, now there's an interesting and broad question. So, I mean, the most tacit piece of advice I always try and give, because it's the first question I ask, is why? I mean, there's that old sort of adage in consulting, right, where you keep asking why till you get to the money. Knowing why a company wants to move to the cloud is critical, because that influences every single decision further down the line. Now, are we moving because the lease is coming up on our existing data center and we don't want to renew it because it's going to be really expensive? That is a particular reason and is a particular kind of cloud migration. And that's the kind of sort of IaaS lift and shift that a lot of organizations do, but it's the first step, right? And it's like, right, well, where's the journey come from? That's a very different scenario and a very different way of moving to the cloud, with a different set of priorities, a different set of skills, a different set of people, than we as an organization want to put a new service in place for our customers. And we think it's going to be really popular. We think it's going to be really well used, but in the short term, it needs to cost us as little as possible while we grow the business. And I've worked with a lot of organizations where, you're building a cloud hosted solution because of the agility of the cloud. And again, now we're into application architecture and application development, and the choice of cloud components, the choice of our direction of travel, how we're going to phase the project, all of those, just those two simple different answers to one question, and we veer off in massively different directions. So yeah, that's the biggie. Why are you doing this? Do you know why you're doing this? If you don't know why you're doing this, frankly, don't do it until you've decided, actually, I want to move to the cloud because my competitors are moving to the cloud, is not the right answer. I want to move to the cloud because our competitors have moved to the cloud and we are now at a commercial disadvantage because they can do things we can't, and I want to have the same capabilities as them. That's fine. It's a bit like, if your best friend went to jump off a cliff, would you follow him? I don't know, maybe. Could be a fun thing to do.
Cool. And you mentioned the white paper you've written. This one was titled Delivering an Enterprise Cloud Operating Model. What sort of topics do you cover in there? And do you think that's a good starting point if people want to learn more about moving to the cloud?
Yeah, so I'm glad you could remember the title, because I never can, but I'm old, so I can get away with that, right? So that title makes it sound very big and enterprise and corporate-y, right? Because when you start talking about operating models, everybody thinks about public sector, they think about huge global enterprises. But that isn't really the case, right? Cloud is something we are going to use. How are we going to operate our cloud services? And every organization needs to think about that. And the idea behind that white paper was to try and articulate to organizations large and small, and stakeholders within those organizations that are technical, not technical, developers, IT pros, technical managers, the whole sort of range, if you like, as to what the important areas are that you need to consider. And I mean, I've touched on some of them already, right? Cost management, security management, data management, technology portfolio management. And it's about putting in place processes whereby you assess where you are, you work out how much you already know, you work out what you're already good at, where you need to learn, plot the journey and review what your progress is, and feed the learnings of that review back into that sort of assessment and planning cycle. It's very ISO 27000, BS 57000, BS 5750, he said, being old. So I did a management degree, right? And a chunk of that was total quality management. And the principle of total quality management was, bluntly, we accept that we're crap and we want to get better. So in order to get better, first of all, we need to identify exactly how crap we are, right? How deep in the mud are we stuck, and where do we want to be? Knowing where we are and where we want to get to, we can plot a path. And what we then need to do periodically is look at what our progress is on that path. And in order to assess our progress, we need to know what we're going to look at. What will tell us whether we're moving forwards, backwards? What metrics, what information are we going to use to decide whether we're doing well or doing badly? And at every point that we look at where we are on that journey, we effectively reassess, right? We go, well, now we're here. Are we better? Are we worse? Do we need to change the direction we're on? Do we need to change the thing we're looking at? Because what we thought we were looking at for information isn't telling us what we need to know. Cloud operations is exactly the same. And what we're trying to articulate in that white paper is effectively, how do you ascertain where you are? What should you look at to help you navigate and work out whether you're on that right path?
Yeah, cool. So you're in the hot seat today because you are an MVP for Azure, but what is it about this cloud platform that you would recommend?
Azure's really interesting, right? The reason we picked Azure as an organization is because when Azure started, it wasn't like any other cloud. So right at the start of this conversation, right, we talked about friends don't let friends do IaaS. Azure started as a pure PaaS play. It didn't offer IaaS. Microsoft looked at the vision of IT, if you like, and said, well, we think what we should be doing is giving people a set of services that have innate capabilities, right? Scalability, billing that is directly related to consumption. And they built that with worker processes and websites. And we helped several customers back in those days move their applications to the cloud. And those customers who picked that model in Azure had a really great journey and a great time in the cloud because they got cost-effective, scalable solutions that really helped their business grow. Interestingly, a lot of the market really didn't grok that, right? And Azure then, as it grew, started to pull in virtual machines, and a lot of people just dropped virtual machines into Azure as a quick lift and shift. Azure Cloud has always been the portfolio of components that are offered that you take and you combine to build your smorgasbord menu of components for your own applications. And that all of those are being offered by the same organization that gives us the development tooling that we know and love with Visual Studio and the language frameworks that we know and love with .NET. And they're implicit in that is an interoperability that if our team has come from an on-premise delivery situation where we've been working with .NET websites and Windows services and running Windows servers, we will have a shallower learning curve if we pick Azure because we can bring all of that knowledge and we can bring a lot of our legacy code with us and we can do evolution, not revolution, which gives a load of value but also removes a load of risk. So that's why we at Black Marble are focused on Azure rather than AWS or Google. It's because the value prop of being able to stand on top of the shoulders of all of those experts that we've worked with for donkey's years who know and understand the on-prem solutions, they're still valuable in the Azure world. And we can bring them on the journey and layer on top then the experience of the new services that lets us do things that frankly we never could have done 10 years ago.
So to finish, do you have a Azure top tip to leave us with?
Azure top tip to leave us with. Ooh, what? So you mean something different than don't leave your VM running overnight because it's going to be expensive?
That could do.
we all have horrible tales of, I deployed this for a bit of experimentation and I forgot to turn it off. And a couple of days later, I realized I'd spent $4,000. Yeah, no, I mean, so my top tip on Azure actually is there is a wealth of documentation about Azure and a wealth of learning about Azure. And my top tip would be don't just hurtle straight into it by going into the portal and deploying stuff. Have a look at docs.microsoft.com. Have a look at acker.ms/governance docs, I think it is, which will talk to you about governance. Have a look at the Microsoft Learn and the learning pathways that will walk you through getting to grips with the technologies. And then you're entering the Azure pool already with knowledge of roughly how you're going to swim and what you want to play with. And again, I think all of the providers do that to an extent, but Microsoft are making a really great striving push to support their cloud with the other things that historically they've done as well, documentation, learning, that kind of stuff. So I guess that's my top tip. Don't rush at it. Go and do a bit of reading first, and there are lots of resources to support you.
That sounds good. And I think that wraps it up for today. So you survived. I told you I'd be nice. As mentioned earlier in the interview, Rik's presenting a webinar on the 10th of November, where he's going to elaborate a bit more about what he's spoken about today. And if you'd like a copy of the white paper, you can get in touch with us. But I hope you've enjoyed that, and thank you.